What's up, people? Can you hear me? I'm playing with the audio settings, trying to learn how to bring music into this. Can someone tell me if you can hear me okay? Pavement, thank you. Kevin, thank you. So you should be able to hear my voice fine. And do you also hear soft background music? Do you guys hear? Can you tell me in the chat? Okay, it's glitchy, but you do hear both. Just experimenting with these different types of tools. No music. Okay, but you can hear my voice fine. I can get this stuff sorted another time, but just thought I'd try to start learning how to do cool shit. Like, it'd be nice if I could learn how to bring in music and do all that stuff smoothly. I also want to play in the future with like different camera angles and stuff like that. So I'll just kind of learn these things as I go or whatever. As long as you can hear my voice, then whatever. We'll just sort of proceed. Joel says, good. The music is making your voice sound glitchy. Okay. How about I'll turn it down a little bit? And if it keeps fucking up, just let me know. I'll turn it off. I also am working on like some ways of making the chat better. They have different tools and bots that basically let you add all this cool functionality to the chat. All right, Jim doesn't hear the music. That's fine. Whatever. Play with that again some other time. There are all these cool bots and tools you can use to make the chats to give them extra functionality. So I've been playing with that also. Like, I'm playing with this thing called Nightbot, which I think gamers use mostly, but it has some cool stuff. I'm just not quite sure. I'll have to learn it just as I go or whatever. But it should be able to let you guys in the chat do interesting stuff. I'm not quite sure if it's working, to be honest. Uptime. Yeah, so Jim is trying to use the commands, but it's not quite set up. So I think it's actually worth setting up. So if you guys are patient and just chilling with me, feel free to type stuff in the chat amongst yourselves and maybe give me some stuff to talk about when we're going live. But I would like to get this. Oh, okay. So it is working. Jim, when you typed uptime, when you did the uptime command, did that work for you or not? I am getting data on my dashboard about the chat. So it does seem to be working. My take on Hegelian dialectics. That's a very deep question. I think Hegel's fascinating genius. I've never really like understood it never really clicked for me personally. Like, I never really kind of got into him, but that's not a really deep answer. I'm just giving you my quick hot take. Nothing was written to the chat. What is supposed to get written to the chat? I think maybe it's something like I have to enter. Let's see, that's supposed to tell me the commands. How to make Nightbot enter chat. Oh, okay. So it did work. Cool. Um, Jim, maybe try the uptime command again. So for those of you who have no idea what's going on, I'm trying to set up this bot that gives the chat functionality. Any of you who do streaming and stuff like that with gamers, you might already know what I'm talking about. But those of you who don't do this stuff a lot, you won't know what I'm talking about. It should be that when you type things, certain commands into the chat, it can make it do cool things for you. So yeah, let's see. All right. Eleanor Rose, what's up? My thoughts on Milo Yiannopoulos. That's a good question. He's been laying low lately, hasn't he? So I don't really know what he's up to right now. But when he first came on my radar, and I saw what he was all about, I listened to a few podcasts with him. He did a few Joe Rogan podcasts, and I listened to both of them at length, and I was quite fascinated by him, to be honest. I think he's pretty hilarious. I mean, I just genuinely found a lot of his performance to be quite amusing and entertaining personally. I didn't think anything he's ever said was like too bad, to be honest. I was always kind of struck by or kind of surprised by how upset with him people were. He always seemed to be like a kind of outsized threat. I actually did try reading, or I looked into the book that he wrote. I think it's called Dangerous. I think I got a PDF of it somewhere. I looked through it. You know, he's not exactly a intellectual heavy hitter. I mean, it's like pretty bad writing, I guess you could say. But I mean, I wouldn't expect much on that front. He's not like an intellectual, really. Well, he is very smart. He's actually much better as a speaker than as a writer. The book was kind of like, it's almost gossipy. It was kind of like mentioning all these names and not really, the book doesn't really put together any particular argument or vision, really. It's kind of like his performative shtick, but packed into text, and it just doesn't really work that way. It reads like a kind of like really long shit post or something like that. So does that basically answer your question? I thought that I've always thought that he's kind of pretty funny, pretty interesting character, I guess, but not exactly bringing too much of particular value to the table from like a serious or meaningful intellectual perspective. Right. So okay. So I have a little bit of I got a few things I'm trying to delve into tonight. Just a few things that have been on my mind or that I want to get off my chest a little bit. But so I think I need to just give up on this chat bot, but maybe I can return to it later. There should be cool things that you can do, but I'll learn how to mess with that later. So, all right. A few things on the agenda today. Well, first thing, actually, we'll save this for a little bit later. But one of the real reasons that I wanted to do this stream tonight is because I watched the Rachel Dolezal documentary on Netflix last night, and it was very fascinating. I had a lot of thoughts about it, let's just say, and I wanted to share some of them. But it's like there are lots of thoughts I have all the time that don't really achieve the level of like it's not worthy of a blog post or something like that, but just something that I'm really interested in talking about. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And Eleanor says she agrees and thinks he's hilarious. But when he talks about free speech, he's usually right on the money. I agree he's not the most intellectual. Albert hates Milo. Okay, you guys can chat about that or fight about that in the comments. I'm just going to proceed. So, right. The first thing, we'll get to Rachel Dolezal a little bit after. The first thing that I want to talk about right now is I want to do a little bit of a response to my haters. Okay? Because after the last stream that I did, it was actually very, very well attended. There were a lot of people there, and it was interesting, and some pretty fascinating kind of exchange taking place in the chat. And I thought Mike was pretty cool dude. I had never met him before, didn't know much about him, and I enjoyed talking with him. So on the whole, I thought it was a cool thing, and generally a successful thing. But I definitely got a good amount of hate both in the chat and also afterwards. I actually got in like some pretty extended DM kind of weird debate things with some people who had some thoughts that were not so positive about the stream. And you know, you could make lots of really good criticisms about me and anything I'm interested in and everything that I do, and that's completely fine. Like I'm not really on YouTube to like make anyone happy other than the whatever number of people out there might happen to be interested in exactly whatever I am and whatever I feel like doing. And I think that is the whole point of YouTube. Like that's what makes YouTube so interesting to me. And I also think, to be honest, it's the real explanation of why it's become so big. And also I think it helps to explain the unique psychology of YouTube. I've been watching YouTube from afar, not like as a fan or as a participant really for a long time. I've always been very kind of intrigued by YouTube and very confused by YouTube, to be honest, because it's so, at first glance, it's so bizarre that so many people would want to watch other random, very normal, average people with all of their faults and all of their, stupidities and shortcomings, like we all have, when it first kind of got really popular, it was very hard to understand. So some people, I think, want to explain that by thinking to themselves, oh, well, those are just stupid people who want to watch other stupid people. Like, it's just dumb. The whole thing is dumb. And I really don't think that's what's going on. And I don't think it's that simple. Because as I got more interested in YouTube, I actually started to get pulled into it, kind of like emotionally and psychologically. Like I started getting really infatuated with some of the content creators on YouTube, and they're not that smart or they're not that polished, and a lot of them are not that good at anything. They're just nerdy or passionate, and they make a lot of content, and it has their unique character in it. And there is something that is just kind of irresistible about that, especially when you find a particular group of creators that kind of relate, you feel like you can relate to. It's a totally different type of media experience. And I only really learned that through having fallen into it, really. And so that's when I started getting really fascinated in YouTube and really kind of inspired, I guess, to wanting to do this sort of stuff. But the reason I go on this explanation is because a lot of the people who know me for my more serious, like intellectual, whatever writings or whatever it might be, my academic publications or my long form, highly analytical blog posts or data analyses or whatever, the people who think of me like that or know of me through that stuff, they might tune into me on YouTube or doing something like this and be really confused or, kind of think I'm lame or silly or stupid or whatever. Like there are lots of, like I said, there are lots of good critiques of all the different types of stuff I'm trying to make or put out, or what I'm trying to do here. But what almost all of the people who want to hate on the YouTube stuff don't understand is that the whole point of YouTube and the value that it provides and the interest in using it is precisely that it cuts across this like competitive prestige economy that, most kind of like intellectual discourse is really trapped in. So like with academia or even with like the posh, online outlets for expressing yourself, symbolically through words and creating ideas or communicating with people through all of the kind of like prestige outlets, academia or otherwise. It's this like really stressful, pressurized game to try to impress people, right? Obviously. And that creates all kinds of pathologies that I think often go much deeper than people want to realize. You have a hard time even accessing some of the lower level, more subtle flows, if you will, of your own observations and feelings and experiences, because if they don't reach the threshold of like significance or importance, and they don't seem, you know, valuable enough in this like prestige economy, you kind of push it down. You don't even give it attention or energy or whatever. It's like you exercise it from your own view of yourself. And that's bullshit. Like if you want to develop a true and full and radically incisive picture of the world and of your own place in it, you need to be able to be open to and be sensitive to observations, experiences, feelings, emotions, affects at all different levels. And, you know, sometimes that should manifest in long form, highly thoughtful, developed, systematic works. But sometimes it means booting up the fucking camera and just saying some random thought that came to you a minute ago and it's totally unpolished, and you say like and but I don't really know. You know, you might sound really crappy when you do these things, but it's necessary that you try to get that out right then and there, to give yourself space for that, or even just, you know, to share things about like your personal experience or whatever. Like it's easy to shit on that as like lame or pedestrian or whatever, but I think that I really don't believe that. I think, you know, for anyone doing any type of intellectual project, whether it's like really highfalutin and serious and ambitious, or just, you know, average people wanting to, you know, build their picture of the world and express themselves or whatever, you know, you need to have platforms and tools to do that at different levels is really all I'm getting at. And yeah, if my streams are, if they seem to many like, you know, posh people thinking about these things from a more prestige, you know, competition perspective, yeah, of course, a lot of the stuff I'm doing on here is going to look stupid. I don't care. I think people like that don't understand the game of like what new media really gives us, like the genuine openings that it provides, which is, in my view, and I've been thinking about this a lot. In fact, my blog posts that I've been posting this week, the series of essays I've been putting out, are basically extended reflections on this. Like in my BAP video series, I was like theorizing kind of this idea of forking reality. And I'll talk a little bit about that more in a minute. But the basic idea there is that I think with new media, what we're seeing is that creative people are basically not just, you know, being creative outside of institutions, but they're constituting totally different reality systems. And then their viewers and listeners kind of pick the reality system that they most want to, you know, live in, and they join it. And so it's like people think virtual reality and this idea of people living in totally different worlds is going to, you know, people when people think about that, their image in their mind is like people wearing VR goggles or something like that. But that's not it. Like it's already happening in a socio-technical sense that ambitious creators who produce consistent content on their own terms are making things like videos and all kinds of supplementary material that is basically like a fully immersive sense of reality. You can kind of enter it and live in it, and you don't really need to ever reckon with you know, other realities. So I mean, that's what all of these platforms are giving us. So if you're really interested in intellectual work and you want to do political theory or philosophy at like a high level, and you want to have, you know, impact on the way people think, and you want to, you know, participate in society as meaningfully as possible, I think you're going to need to do things like operating on the level that YouTube provides. And that means like being real, being, you know, showing, you know, your warts and all. So that's like what I'm doing, and that's what I'm interested in. And I don't, so basically, make a long story short, you know, if people who are judging, you know, intellectual quality from a more traditional perspective, like how many times I say like, or how many times my guest says in their sentences, like I think that they are, you know, really locked and trapped in a world that is rapidly crumbling. That's already basically crumbled. My view at this point is I think all people should basically use whatever current technologies are available to them to basically explode themselves as provocatively and usefully as possible. You know, to take all of the thoughts and feelings they have and make them work on the different platforms that exist in the ways that those platforms enable things to work. And these different platforms have different codes. They have different psychologies. They work along different mechanisms. And my theory is that YouTube in particular is all about just being totally real, not trying too hard to be super posh or prestigious, and just getting after it, like being consistent, making stuff all the time and creating this kind of like reliable little world for you and for the other people that, you know, you're doing things with, who also are making their own worlds or whatever. And just being consistent and just being super fucking real. I think that's like what YouTube is really cool about. It enables it, but also promotes it. Like that's what people on YouTube actually want, I think. And I love that idea. And so, yeah, that's not going to look cool to many kind of academic, prestigious, you know, judges. But yeah, I don't care. I'm playing a different game. So that's one of my rants that I wanted to go on, kind of responding to some of the haters. I've chosen to ignore the text chat so I could focus on my thoughts, because one thing I learned in the last chat was that I was kind of looking at the chat too much. So let me check on what people are saying now. I'll take a little break from my ranting. Mark says the popularity of YouTube and any independent media still follows a power law, an emergent elite, not a very even or meritocratic distribution. Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely not saying that YouTube or any social media platform, you know, provides a kind of like equalized playing field. It does not tend to do that. These platforms all, as you know, Mark correctly says, they do follow power law distributions, which basically, folks, that just means that a very, very small number of players have extraordinarily powerful influence, and then the overwhelming majority of all people in the network have very, very little influence. All social media networks follow that distribution, and it's true, you know. But that's actually a little bit more complicated than you might think, because one way to interpret that is thinking like, oh, there's no way to have any type of effect or significance or success on these channels that are, you know, where influence is so unequally distributed. But another way to think about it is, if you can get even slightly up that power curve, that's actually a lot of traction. Now, relative to the biggest names, it's not at all. But the question is always like, what is the relevant amount of influence that you need to make something worthwhile? And I would argue, especially for someone like me who's interested in like batshit, like radical theory and stuff like that, I've never in my life imagined or wanted like a massive audience. All I've ever really wanted is just enough people to care a little bit about what I'm thinking and what I'm trying to figure out. And if I can just get that small number of people genuinely interested in what I'm trying to do, then that's more than enough to motivate me to keep doing it. So, I mean, the power law thing is that power curve is kind of daunting, and it might seem like it closes off access, but that's only if you're thinking in terms of like, you know, dominating. Like I think as long as you're not thinking about dominating, the openness and the network distributions of social media are, you know, quite hospitable to independent, autonomous like startups. And I think, you know, the data does show that. Jim Johnston says nuance is dead. So I don't know what Jim means there actually, but that does remind me of a different point that also some haters have kind of brought up to me recently, which is, you know, I guess you could see all the stuff I'm doing on YouTube as kind of like pissing away cultural credibility or something like that. Like, I think some people think I'm an academic, so I should be prim and proper, and I should only really, you know, say what I certainly know to be true, and that is, you know, well verified by, you know, scientific method, and, you know, I should stick to what I'm an expert on or whatever, something like that. And the reason why people think you should do that is because we're living in this world where no one really believes anything anymore, and everyone is just giving stupid hot takes. And as Jim kind of mentions, nuance is dead. Like, no one's maintaining the ground or space of, you know, really careful expert, you know, credibility and seriousness. And, you know, I'm sympathetic to that. I've thought about that a lot. But the thing is, I think that you can both do serious, rigorous work and dedicate the lion's share of your energy to doing that, and also participate in these other spaces where, yeah, nuance is kind of dead. Like the fact, like if nuance is dead in a space like YouTube or a space like Twitter or whatever, you know, you don't gain anything for yourself or others by simply removing yourself from it. To me, the optimal thing to do, and this is what I think no one's really figured out yet, but, you know, will people should try to figure out, and eventually will figure out, is figuring out how to have a serious, long-term, rigorous, credible intellectual project, but also have a foothold in all of these different worlds of beautiful, interesting, fascinating, different types of craziness. I mean, one thing is to say that nuance is dead. Another thing is to say that, you know, there's an extraordinary fragmentation in terms of expectations and in terms of what counts as meaningful. And I think if you approach that with a more creative perspective, then, you know, for instance, the conspiracy theories on YouTube, like YouTube is a bastion, just overflowing with all kinds of ridiculous, misleading conspiracy theories. And, you know, a lot of people look at that and wring their hands and they're horrified. But do you have to be so horrified about that? I think you could see that as quite an interesting development, and even a positive development in a specific sense, that what it means is that people want something better than this bullshit world that we all, you know, currently are more or less stuck in. People are willing to take leaps into different types of worlds. And I think that's really fascinating. And also, not to mention that these platforms, like if these platforms are allowing people to kind of buy into all these crazy conspiracy theories, well, then how about this? How about smart, good people join the game and you know, start doing their own, creating their own world, you know, start doing their own world building, is a word that I've kind of been thinking about recently. You know, all this means is that reality is plastic, and we should all maybe start getting more serious about learning how to play it all in our own ways. So that's kind of what I'm interested in, and I think that's actually pretty cool. So Left Cat has some interesting comments. Joel has some interesting comments. I just don't want to get too trapped in this. I think I gave a good long rant on those topics, and those are things that I actually am thinking a lot about right now. So that was all good to share and get off my chest. I would like to, if it's okay with you guys, I'm afraid I might lose some viewers, but I'd like to take a bathroom break. Don't go anywhere. I'll come right back. I want to talk about, I really want to talk about Rachel Dolezal. And also I want to tell you a little bit more about this idea of like how I think reality is increasingly being forked, which is a term from software engineering. By the way, like I try not to do this kind of stuff because I hate being like I'm not like a salesperson or whatever, but for those of you watching this, definitely, if you would, like, subscribe, because it's good to know that people are watching and they want to see me do this sort of stuff more. If you do, if you don't, then don't subscribe by all means. But just getting some kind of signal about like people, you know, being into this and being on board. So definitely subscribe if you haven't already. It's useful to see that. Also, if you want to, maybe like share this stream with people, like retweet it or whatever. I don't know. I'm not really like that up on YouTube culture to like know what the norms are on this sort of stuff. I'm just kind of winging it by the seat of my pants. But it occurred to me I should probably say those sorts of things. So let me run to the loo real quick, and I'll be right back. This is fun. By the way, loo is British term for bathroom. Maybe what I could do is I could turn like music on now. Let's see how this works. Is that cool? That gives you like some... Hey, Joel, you said this content is awesome. Thank you so much, man. That means a lot to me. I really like getting feedback, good and bad. I genuinely like the bad feedback because that gives me stuff to rant about, like I just did. So I just put on some music. So that should hopefully hold things down. I'll be back in like 3 minutes. Ignore the haters, Justin. You're doing great. Thanks, Albert. I appreciate that. By the way, your birthday's coming up soon. Cool. Happy birthday, man. Tell me when your birthday is, and I'll give you a shout out if I'm doing a stream that day. All right. I didn't lose any viewers. That's awesome. Thank you. You guys are with me. Appreciate that. All right. So, all right. Turn this music off. So, I already talked about this idea of reality forks a little bit. And that's what my recent blog posts are about. I actually won't talk about it too much more, but I'll give you a quick look. I also want to play around with this screen share function. Let's see if I can. I want to show you my screen. I want to see if I can get this stuff under control. Yeah, check it out. So now, as I'm getting better at using these tools, I can do cool stuff like show you stuff on the internet and talk about it while we're hanging out together. Oh, that's me. Don't want recursive. Right. So I've been posting this week these blog posts about this idea of hard forking reality. So in a nutshell, I'll tell you the argument real quick for those of you who haven't had the time to read it or just don't care or whatever. But the basic idea is simply that for the most part in human history, people always have different versions of reality to some degree, right? On a daily basis, we all kind of go off on different branches in some sense in our interpretation of the world. That's inevitable. But we always historically tend to kind of merge back with each other, you know, so in the ancestral environment, that might be like the campfire, for instance, right? We all kind of have different experiences throughout the day, but then at night over dinner or the campfire or whatever, you know, your proverbial idea is for when people come back together and kind of discuss and integrate, you know, their shared conceptions, whatever you want to call it. In my essays, I've been calling it the campfire. What we do basically is we're all submitting our, you know, different versions of reality that we've went off on back into a main source repository. So if we think about society as like running code, then you could call our everyday, you know, divergences from reality. You can think of those as what we might call in the software engineering world, like soft forks. And a soft fork is basically just when someone pulls off a copy of the shared source code, manipulates it, and then merges it back with the shared source code. And there's also, so that's generally like a soft fork in its simplest sense. By the way, I'm not like a software engineer, so some of this stuff might be a little rough around the edges. That's fine. I think I got the idea well enough to get it across. And in contrast to soft forks, there's also this term of hard forks. And a hard fork is basically when someone pulls off a copy of the source code, manipulates it, but then changes the fundamentals of the code in such a way that it can't really go back into the shared source code that everyone else is operating on. And so hard fork kind of just basically refers to a really, you know, strong, strict, formal departure from the original shared code into a fundamentally different type of code with two parallel paths. So if you look, for instance, at these graphs, I can kind of explain them to you real quick. This is like the model of a soft fork where the fork comes off the main development route, right? And then it goes back into it. And it's all copacetic. But here is what a hard fork looks like. It's just divergence. It's separate tracks that never really meet back up. So I dropped that a couple days ago, and then even more recently, I dropped this part 2 where I talk about how communication and complexity play into all of this. So the idea that I focus on in this second part is that our ability to solve problems, in other words, our ability to pull off soft forks of the social code that we all share, our ability to make those forks and then recontribute those forks is conditioned on certain variables. There are certain structural factors that make it easier or harder. And I basically give a very simple model. I'm trying to develop a very simple model of this idea. And basically, what I suggest in this part 2 is that the ability for human beings to solve problems with each other Oh, let me maybe go back to myself. You don't want to stare at this screen the whole time. Let me there we go. So the idea in that second part is really quite simple, I think, but it's just that the possibility of human beings solving social conflicts cooperatively, in a reasonable and mature way using rationality, you know, that is going to be aided by the development of communication technology in some sense. But the proliferation of technology more generally is associated with a vast increase in the general complexity of our society. And so basically the model I suggest is that I think our ability to solve social problems is something like our communicative capacities divided by the environmental complexity. And I draw a lot on the work of R.S. Backer, who, by the way, is a super fascinating, pretty brilliant dude who I've only recently come across. If you're into this sort of stuff, I definitely recommend his blog. He's like a very independent, very smart dude. He has some serious like academic credibility, and I think he even has like legit publications in academic outlets. I think, if I recall correctly. But he's like a fantasy writer, and I think he just works full time as a independent writer of mostly fiction, and then he writes like bomb ass blog posts about like social theory and cognitive science. He seems like a really smart dude. I've never met him, and I've only read a few of his blog posts, but I've actually really been influenced by them. Yeah, his name's R. Scott Backer. So I cite him a bit in this, and my ideas here are kind of building on him. Anyway. Yeah, so he talks a lot about the increasing environmental complexity that defines contemporary reality. And he talks about how this is leading to absolute chaos, what he calls a semantic apocalypse. And I think that very astutely and usefully captures precisely all the cultural chaos that we're in right now. That basically there's so much complexity that no one can make heads or tails of it. And all of the pathological behaviors we're seeing on the left and the right, really, and even off the political spectrum in everyday social life, for instance, all kinds of pathologies that are in large part, I think, usefully understood as kind of pathological responses to a horrifically complex social environment. So basically, what I suggest in part 2 of this essay series that I just released recently is that as complexity increases, it becomes harder for us to solve any types of problems between ourselves. Communication tools help us do that, but communication tools also contribute to the complexity. So basically what I think is going on is that we're now in a situation where even basic interpersonal social problems are prohibitively costly to solve. And I spell that out in much more detail, giving some examples and trying to kind of express the semi-formal logic of that a little bit more in these blog posts in a more thoughtful way. But that's the gist of it. I think complexity has so dwarfed our communicative abilities as human beings that even basic interpersonal challenges or conflicts that arise between most people in the world, it's always going to be cheaper and easier to just split off from them. To just agree to disagree, and then do things like, join your favorite YouTube channel and follow your favorite guru and join your favorite cult, and all of these things that humans have always done to kind of escape from the parts of society that they're not interested in and join the parts of society that they are interested in. That stuff is just getting supercharged, basically, because complexity has so broken down our capacity to communicate and solve problems across the social space that what we're seeing is people just going hardcore into pockets that they're most interested in, and we're now able to do that quite cheaply, and there's no reason that we ever need to really confront other people directly and solve problems directly. So I'll answer Albert's question in just a moment, but just to kind of wrap this up, basically, well, I have some more editions of this essay that are coming out. I think it'll probably be a 4-part series, although I'm not sure. They'll be coming out in the next week. And where I'm going with this, though, is that I think when you really think this through, you can develop a much more precise theoretical model, really. So I'm trying to turn this into a proper kind of social science idea with hypotheses that can be tested against the data. because some of the stuff I'm saying sounds a lot like generic ideas that maybe you've heard before. But I think that if you really kind of break down the component parts of this larger model, we can make some more precise predictions. And to be honest, I don't know of that many people who are really trying to theorize this in a really serious social scientific way. So yeah, at this point, if this is academic research or public internet stuff, I really don't even know the difference anymore. I think I've given you enough info about that. I don't. My purpose right now is not to really tell you the whole thing or sell you on the big idea, but just in case you hadn't seen that, I thought I'd give you a quick and dirty kind of summary of what I'm trying to do there. We can talk more about it if you want to. Albert says, have you read Zygmunt Bauman? No, I'm quite familiar with the name and kind of their like general kind of place in some of these ideas, but I'm not familiar with their work, unfortunately. No. Yeah, I would not be surprised if he does have similar ideas. Yeah, that's right. Left Cat also asks, have you ever heard of Pjoule? Is that how you pronounce it? It's a version control system like Git, except it represents a project's history using patch data structure rather than a tree data structure like Git. Fascinating. No, never heard of it. Yeah, so okay, that's interesting. It uses patches. Its use of patches makes it very obviously relevant to your project, as it enables one to build a more distributed and patchworky view of epistemological reality. Something to after the stream may be. I'm not quite sure of that last part, but that's fascinating. That's really interesting. Left Cat, you should I would love if you wrote something up about that. I would definitely love to read that, especially like how it informs a different type of epistemology or something like that. Definitely, if you can spell that out a little bit better, I would definitely like to read it. And maybe you can help me kind of work out these ideas or something. Yeah. So real quick, just the last kind of John says, when you talk about data, what kind of data? Big data, cultural capital, statistics? Yeah, whatever kind of data. In social science, the idea is to build theories that are, at least in principle, amenable to testing, that you could imagine getting data to test it. So that could be many different types of data, really. As a social scientist, I tend to personally think in terms of, not so much like big data. I'm more interested in kind of more traditional, high quality social science data. Not that big data is low quality, but just that, for a lot of the questions that I'm most interested in, you don't really need big data. I tend to be interested in is like long-term historical data personally, across space and across time. Of course, big data can be that also, but I actually think the traditional data sets that social scientists use have been not at all yet exhausted. There's lots of really, really interesting insights lying in them, even though they're not like fancy, sexy big data sets. The problem is that most academic social scientists are just boring people, no offense to them. And they're not like really looking at the super fascinating and dicey questions that I think they could be. Mark says, what is the difference between what's happening now and when the printing press was new? Like with Martin Luther and what happened to Christianity? Yeah, I talk about that in the essay. I'm pretty sure. Well, yeah, I definitely talk about the rise of print technology. And I think this is all one long history, really. So, when the argument in media studies for a long time has been that the rise of mass media in terms of print technology, the rise of printing and book technology really, was very close to the time of the Reformation. And people have long thought that the rise of the printing press played a key causal role in the possibility of the Reformation. So already there, you're seeing a similar type of dynamic where the ability to communicate gets improved, and yet it also increases the complexity of options for different players to play all different types of games with each other and pursue the different interests and from different angles and different perspectives. So people think that like communication capacity is going to bring people together, but it almost never does, because its contribution to making society more frayed, to allowing people to separate, lowering the transaction costs of various types of departures and new It actually enables the ability to destroy old structures and to create new separate structures. So it looks to me like generally, as information communication technology becomes increasingly advanced at all of its levels, going as far back as, you know, the printing press and even before that, I'm sure, you do tend to see in its wake exit dynamics, or, you know, forking dynamics. In other words, like, yeah, you could see the Protestant Reformation as like the one of the major initial explosive forking moments that characterize modernity. Of course, yeah, I think that's absolutely right. But I think that we're now in a late stage of that, and you know, when you have accelerating phenomena, it's always very strange, because when you have these exponential curves, it's hard to describe, but like where you're at on any point of the curve, it's very hard. It's just very hard to comprehend, because you could think like the beginning of an exponential curve, like early on, feels subjectively quite explosive, because going from a flat line to an up spike on that exponential curve relative to the flatness is subjectively quite strong. But let's say you're born into a world where, you know, if this is like the exponential curve, this is not going to work. I need a fucking whiteboard or something like that. I'll figure this out. Anyway, if you're born at a moment in time where you're in the middle of the exponential curve, your background, it might be this like explosive speed, but if you're born into it, then speed is also your baseline. Okay, so there's this very weird thing that I don't think anyone has really thought about this much, or certainly hasn't solved this problem, especially people that are interested in, you know, what's called accelerationism, like I am really very interested in these questions. Exponential curves are extremely strange, especially when you think about historical experience, because our experience is grounded to and relative to, you know, our some sort of baseline, some sort of reference point. But if you enter the historical, you know, trajectory, if you enter the historical time series, if you will, precisely when world history itself is in this kind of explosively accelerating moment, you like, is that going to feel more accelerating than how people felt at the time of Martin Luther? Like, I suspect the sincere subjective experience of like watching the early stages of the Protestant Reformation play out was like probably as vertiginous as, you know, any of the kind of cultural chaos that we're now watching, with people breaking off into fundamentally different worlds and the kind of stuff that we're watching. Like, I don't have a strong answer to this question, but I'm just trying to sketch the problematic or the question, like which of those two moments on the exponential curve of accelerating technological change, which of those two moments actually feels more vertiginous? Which of those is actually, you know, crazier or objectively more intense? It's very hard to say because of the problem of things always being relative to baselines. But that's like a really fascinating question that I think has not really even been asked, let alone answered. So people should try to work that out. I've been thinking about it for a while, in part because I think personally that the information revolution in you know, the middle of the 20th century was an inflection point of some kind, because there was just an explosion of technological advancements in all different sectors following the discoveries that were made basically during the war effort. So personally, I'm inclined to see the past few decades in an empirical story that is responding to a kind of nonlinear exogenous shock that was the information revolution. But that's something I've been working on for a while. I don't know if I'd really pinned that down, but it certainly seems like something like that is happening. So part of this essay series I'm working on is trying to work that out a little bit. In particular, what I argue is that I think that with the explosion of information communication technologies that we've been living through since like the 50s at least, you know, the rise of cable TV, then internet, all these sorts of things, more or less, you know, outgrowths of specific innovations like the transistor made in the middle of the 20th century. What it's done is it's drastically enabled kind of creative, intelligent people to make like fundamentally disruptive departures from status quo institutions, but that's highly unequal. It's highly conditional on certain traits and capacities that we have that are unequally distributed. with something like IQ being like so far one of the most reliable measures we have for that sort of ability that would be relevant, otherwise known as general intelligence. And so my theory is that one of the best ways to understand the past few decades is to think about is to generate theoretical expectations about how increasing information technological, information communication power, how that is going to have an interaction with cognitive stratification. And I think if you think about things that way, a lot of the current reality that so confuses people starts to make a lot of sense. I'll kind of hint a little bit at like future implications that I'm trying to kind of drive at. But one thing I'll say that I've been thinking for a long time is that I feel very convinced that all of the kind of the really crazy left wing kind of excesses going on right now, like hysterical SJWism and all of that stuff. I think what that is it's something like moderately intelligent and moderately verbally fluid people who are extremely compassionate. Their entire world is being destroyed by technological forces that at the same time are rewarding extraordinarily, but only for super smart people, and also just absolutely brutal and cold for people that are even dumber than them. So I think that if you're compassionate and you're like moderately intelligent, right now is a truly painful and horrifying time to be living through, because you don't really have a chance at participating in the extraordinary rewards, the monetary rewards of this new information economy that overwhelmingly rewards like the most intelligent people, but not so much normal people. Even like a slightly above average people really are like struggling to even have any role in like the current society and its technological forces. But if you're super compassionate, then you like don't even have the ability to get your own shit together, because you're like overwhelmed with guilt and pity and sadness watching other people's watching other people struggle. Okay, so I think there's something like that going on, and that's why these essays I'm writing and what I'm currently working on is really thinking about how different traits are interacting with the explosion of information technology, because I think when you think those things through, the past few decades start to make a lot of sense, and you can kind of understand why different types of people are orienting themselves to all of this stuff in very different ways. So that's in a nutshell, kind of what I'm thinking on that question. Joel asks, what do you think is what makes rap music so influential, and what makes society more binary? I'm not sure what you mean by more binary. So I think I'll just focus on the rap music question, which is very random, but I appreciate randomness. I'm quite a fan of a very particular, small subset of rappers. And honestly, I don't even know what puts them all together. I used to be a huge fan of Tupac. People might be interested to learn. Like when I was in high school, when I was just a kid, he was like my idol. I loved him. I used to listen to his music all the time, and I even kind of identified with him. I mean, I was kind of like a wigger, I guess you could call me. Are you allowed to say that? Is that like racist? I don't know. I feel like I'm white, so I can call myself that. It's like making fun of me. So how bad can it be to say that? I honestly don't know like what is allowed to be said nowadays. I'm so sort of like detached from PC stuff that I don't really care about it one way or the other. I don't know anymore. Anyway, not to digress too much. Yeah, I used to like love Tupac, and I kind of dressed like a wigger. And it was very interesting because I mean, I don't know if it's still like this, but a lot of like white kids in like high school and like suburban, high schools, like it was very normal to be like kind of like act black a little bit. Very strange. I mean, looking back on it, I don't know why that is. I don't really understand that history, but yeah, I like identified a lot like with Tupac subjectively. I was like, oh, very interesting. I've never really been able to make sense out of that. Well, I can make sense out of it in the sense that I can tell you why I liked his songs. I mean, he's super deep dude, super poetic and legit, like authentic, artist and creator. I think the problem today is that a lot of the rap music, just like all of the pop music also, like, I mean, this isn't peculiar to rap, but so much rap is horrible, just because so much, you know, contemporary culture is horrible. I don't think it's unique to rap, but I think many of the artists, they're not artists at all. They're completely fake, like posters of, you know, something that they're supposed to represent, and everything's, you know, created by producers and stuff like that. So, you know, true artists are like extremely rare and few and far in between. But someone like Tupac was like totally legit artist. I mean, he had a much larger vision, and was like a natural, you know, just a natural performer. Like, some people just have this kind of gift of just needing to be, you know, like very evocative and effective and powerful with their words and how they carry themselves. And it's kind of hard to describe. I mean, it's a random question. I don't really have any like expertise on this. I'm just giving you my thoughts. So I really liked Tupac. I think he was like an incredible artist. But yeah, nowadays, I mean, I guess I am pretty sympathetic to the idea that rap music is pretty like socially problematic. Like, I think it does promote a lot of horrible things, but so does, I think, pop music. You know, I think like a lot of seemingly normal like liberal culture also is like pretty degenerative of like our values and norms that I think are like really worth fighting for. But we won't judge you for the W word, Justin. Limp Bizkit fan here. Nice. All ties back together. Justin's adolescent Tupac fandom related to Dolezal as mild transracialism. Thank you, Tech Cocaine. This is a perfect transition for me to dodge the rap question, which I don't have that too much to say. Other than I also really like Drake, which I think confuses people because he's often seen as like a superficial rapper. But no, I think he's legit. I really like him. We could talk more about that another time. Let's move to the final segment of this stream. My voice cords are getting a little frayed, which Tech Cocaine politely reminded me of, and now we can move into it. Rachel Dolezal. I'm not sure how many of you watching this right now watched the Rachel Dolezal documentary on Netflix, but first of all, I recommend it. Even if whether you like her or dislike her, you will find it very interesting and worth watching. In fact, what I was thinking, now that I know how to do screen sharing, I want to see if we can watch the trailer together. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to hear it, but I'll use this as a jumping off point to talk about it. That way we can, for those of you who haven't seen it, we can all get on the same page. If I get like a really good thought that I want to share, I might pause this, but if not, we'll just watch it. It's only 2 minutes. The thing is, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to hear it. This is just the trailer. So can someone type in the chat if you're not able to hear it? Is the sound coming through? Can you hear that or no? No sound. Can't hear it. Nice. I'll just post the link then. We'll just leave this picture up so we can visualize Rachel while I'm talking about her. All right, I'll give you the I'll put the link in the chat so you guys can see this on your own time, or if you want, you can watch it while I'm talking. That might be fun. Right. So, let me go back to this so you can see my face. Right. All right. So, Rachel Dolezal. Why do I want to talk about Rachel Dolezal? Well, people, I have to say I've totally updated my view on her. I never really looked into it too much, but I kind of more or less assumed that she was like, like crazy, fucked up, liar, fraud of a person. And I didn't really care that much about it either way, but that was my kind of informal read on that stuff when it all kicked up. But watching this documentary, I have to admit, I think that transracialism might be a real thing. And I think Rachel Dolezal is maybe a legitimate case of transracialism. I mean, okay, here's the thing. What you see when you watch that movie is that her investment and identification with blackness and with being black is really long-standing, and it's truly like subjectively deep. So one of the things that people don't know, unless you looked really deep into the story, is that her parents were abusive and probably like white racist people, but they adopted a bunch of black kids. And so Rachel Dolezal, born white to white parents, but they adopted black kids, and they were abusive of all of the kids. They were physically and emotionally abusive. And Rachel Dolezal basically disowned her parents to support these like poor black adoptees and basically like support them and have solidarity with them. Like she basically, from a young age, watching this fucked up family situation play out, she identified with, in solidarity with, these like poor black kids who were adopted into this like abusive white parenting. And that was like the beginning of her like deep identification with blackness. And I'm sorry, but I think that's like, I feel like that's fair enough. It's reasonable enough. Like if you're really fucked up by family trauma when you're young, and in trying to deal with that, there's like reasonable, objective circumstances, and you're surrounded by, black people in your family, like your siblings are black people, and your way of processing the trauma is to have deep subjective identification with blackness and with like your black siblings who you feel like very compelled to side with and to support. I feel like that gives you, I mean, I feel like that's fair enough. I mean, she from that point on, she really does feel black. And who am I to say that she's not? The thing that really I can't quite get over is the analogy to transgenderism. Like, I'm totally sympathetic to gender self-determination. I think that if someone who is assigned male at birth wants to be, feels female or, says that they are female, then I say, okay, that's fine with me. You're female. I think that's fine. And I think that's like the appropriate way to treat people, whatever the reason is. It is true that, transgenderism is at least correlated with mental health issues. No one's going to deny that. Its actual relationship with mental health is complicated. I won't go there on that for now. But the point is, trauma is often correlated with transgenderism. And so it's not my view is that it's not my business to question like why someone's gender identification might change over time. But trauma and deep kind of personal subjective processes are sometimes at play that I don't necessarily understand. And if that's how they want to live out their life and their struggles, we all have the right to live out our lives and our struggles how we want. I mean, that's what this thing life is. And so, I mean, for the same reasons that I'm sympathetic to and supportive of like transgenderism and gender self-determination, I found it impossible to watch the Rachel Dolezal documentary and hate on her or say that she's, doing something fundamentally wrong or something that fundamentally should be rejected. Like watching if you watch that documentary, there's a lot of interesting clips where people are kind of like talking shit to Rachel and talking shit at Rachel. And a lot of the clips happen to be of black people kind of telling Rachel why what she's doing is fucked up. And my feeling is like, I don't see how those people telling her that she can't be who she says she is. Like especially when you see how deep, her story goes. Oh, by the way, she basically adopted her siblings, her black siblings who were being beaten by her white parents. She adopted them as children, basically. So like, again, deep commitment and investment and subjective attachment to blackness and black people. And so like, when you see all of that, which I didn't know any of that. I didn't know any of that at all. When you see all of that, you're like, okay, this is a genuine psychological phenomenon where she's like, she really is all in and she's invested in it. Like she's really put herself all in and she's committed hardcore to blackness and to black people that are like really important in her life as a fundamental part of her life. When someone says to her, you can't do that, or you're faking it, or you're not allowed to do that, I call bullshit on that. I think that's fucked up. Like, for the same reason I think, TERFs are kind of fucked up. Like, people who tell transgender people that they can't be trans. I think that's fucked up. And I think that it's very hard for me to process why people don't see anti-Rachel Dolezal haters as like evil as TERFs are seen. That's a really fascinating question, which I've been thinking about a lot. Like, why is transgenderism kind of like cool on the radical left, but transracialism is like, no, thou shall not go there at all. I don't think that there's a logical explanation for it. And I think this movie really dramatizes like how fucked up it is, I think, to hate on Rachel Dolezal. And I actually wonder now from watching that movie if, in like 20 years, are we going to look back on like the black people hating Rachel Dolezal and telling her she can't have her identity? Are we going to see those people as we now see TERFs? TERFs, by the way, is what is it? Trans exclusionary radical feminists, like feminists who say, transgender people are not legit. Transgender women are not legit women or something like that. Like, I think all the black people who are hating on Rachel Dolezal and saying, no, you can't do that, are going to be seen as like, we now see like patriarchal men or TERFs. And it seems that was my honest impression to it. Honestly, I don't even know how hot a take this is. Like, is this the common view of it now, or is this like still a dicey thing to say? I genuinely don't really know, but just laying out my thoughts. So, yeah, the documentary definitely changed my mind about that. I think you have to agree that transracialism is like, at least maybe it's really rare, but it seems to be a legitimate psychological subjective transformation process that is not at all that different from transgenderism. Different in many, certain ways, I'm sure, of course, but seems equally legitimate as like a real, valid psychological experience that people do have. I think Rachel Dolezal had it. And I'm very hard pressed ethically to find a reason why she's like, should be like forced to not have that. So that's my read on that. I just thought it was very interesting because I didn't know that much about it, and I basically totally reversed my views. So I thought it was just something interesting to share. Let me check the chat, see what all these people are saying. Tech Cocaine's got some comments. Right, he makes a good point. One of the middle, the high school age son, kind of disagrees with her. And doesn't really like her public stances. Yeah. Okay. I think I agree with the second thing Tech Cocaine says, which is basically that I think he's just stressed out because he's a teenager and he's in high school, and it probably is really freaking hard because everyone knows them as, being the sons of Rachel Dolezal, and it causes them a lot of stress. And also they're like black people. They're, I don't want to say real black people, but they're black people, and how hard it must be for them to be black and be themselves or whatever in high school when they're so young, or middle school or whatever it is, when like the whole world knows their mom as like a liar and as like a fake black person. That's got to be just super annoying. So I think Tech Cocaine is right that there are some parts of the movie where the sons seem not cool with it, but on the whole, they're actually pretty cool with it. Like, on the whole, like, I was very surprised how basically good they seem to have a pretty healthy family, given this like horrible stuff as a background. They all like get along really well, and they clearly love it. She clearly is a sweet mother. Like, she clearly loves them like crazy, and is really, really good to them. But I think that comes through clearly in the movie. And they're pretty happy. They're like really, smart, like well behaved and seemingly pretty cool kids who get along well with her and respect her also a lot. I think it's natural for like a 13-year-old to maybe be resentful at their mother for like making a fuss. The issue in the movie was that the kids, I think, supported her and understood her, and I think they did accept her as black. But I think what Tech Cocaine is citing here is that she did kind of fib a little bit here and there. She wasn't extremely straightforward about it all. Also, folks, this is the really funny and kind of scandalous thing that I didn't realize was that it looks like she might have faked a hate speech claim. And to me, that's like the most reprehensible thing she did in the movie. Apparently, she claims to have been the victim of a death threat or something like that in her PO box, and that one of the investigators claims to have kind of uncovered as a fraudulent claim of hate crime. I don't know if it's true. It wasn't really conclusively presented, but that was like, okay, that's fucked up. If she really did that, that's reprehensible. But you know, people are imperfect or whatever. Like the race thing, like does not seem, you know, does not seem. I feel hard pressed to judge it, to be honest. Not to offend anyone, Joel says by saying this, but religion has made us see things one-sided, and that's what makes people feel like they shouldn't be who they are. That could be it. Andy says black identity is weaponized as righteous group anger. Female identity is weaponized as. Yeah, it's just strange. I don't know. Like why, you know, why is that? Like, why does transgenderism get like a positive charge and transracialism gets a negative charge? It's a really fascinating question, though. So yeah, that's my reaction to the Rachel Dolezal documentary. I probably have some other thoughts on it, but I've been going for an hour and a half now. It's you know, my ranting abilities are pretty good, but they're not limitless. So I think that's all for now. We can wrap it up, I think. Thank you for joining me on this stream. It's been at least about 20 of you hanging out this whole time. So thank you for your interest in this, and thanks for hanging out with me. And yeah, if you have other thoughts, you know, shoot me questions. I'll try to answer them maybe in future talks or Space Explorer. Thank you very much. Appreciate the kind words. Also, like I said, don't forget to subscribe. If you haven't already, please do that. It sends me the message that people are into this stuff and helps me, you know, find the energy to keep going. So yeah, feel free to shoot me messages or whatever if there's other stuff you want to talk about or stuff you think I should make or whatever. My lines are open to you. And thanks for the interesting chat. I'll try to let you know when I'm doing this again. You know, I actually do really find this stuff to be pretty cool and fun. And, you know, the fact that there's a good handful of you kind of with me every time doing this, it does make me feel like maybe I will invest in doing this stuff like more consistently over time. Like I'm thinking about maybe finding some time like twice a week or something like that where I commit to doing it, you know, like at a certain time every week. Maybe twice a week or something like that. I'm not sure I can pull that off yet. I've like a lot of shit I'm doing, but this is fun. And, you know, if people are into it, I'm happy to keep doing it. So I'll keep you posted about that as I figure it out. But in the meantime, yeah, do subscribe and let me know if you have any other thoughts. Thanks, folks. I'm out of here. My vocal cords are fried. Take care, everybody.